Welcome to the Get Sellers Calling You podcast for Christian real estate agents, where we help you grow your real estate business with some great marketing tips and grow your faith with some powerful radical faith teaching. I'm Beatty Carmichael, and I'm glad you joined us today. Today, we're going to be doing another Radical Faith Bible Study session, and it's going to be absolutely phenomenal. You'll really enjoy it. So sit back and watch it and listen and be very blessed. Welcome, everyone, back to this is Zealous for Good Works, Part 3, as we figure out how many parts it's going to be by the time we get through them all. Let me get that throat lozenge out. And this is going to be a kind of an exciting one. This is some stuff the Lord's been showing me recently. Everything just kind of seems to all wind together, as you know how the Lord does. But before we get started, just a quick update for our podcast listeners who are out there. Since I do this live in front of a studio audience, and then we put this out on the podcast. So just a reminder to subscribe to our podcast if you haven't already. And you can just hit the subscribe button on your podcast player, and that will just let you know when we publish new podcasts. Be sure also, if you like these, please be sure to share it on social media. On your podcast player, you should see a little share button, and you can send it out to your Facebook friends or just to text to someone that you think would be interested in it. And the final thing is, if you come back and listen to this again, or actually come to our website, the podcast channel website, whether it's getradicalfaith.com or getsellerscallingyou.com, and watch the video, you'll get so much more out, because you only get half the communication when you just listen to it. You get less than half the communication when you're listening to it while you're doing other things. But if you can actually watch it and pay attention, you'll get a lot more out of it. So you'll enjoy that. My wife is grinning over here because she listens to my podcast right in the middle of cooking dinner and everything else. But I did the same thing, so it's okay. Just a real quick review where we've come from and where we're going. So we've been talking on this topic of being zealous for good works. This comes from Titus, where it says that Titus 2:14 says that Jesus gave himself to redeem us as a people for his own possession who are zealous for good works. And what we did on our first session is we started talking about those good works and said, what are they? And we came up with a simple thing, that these good works are these good works that the Lord prepared before the foundation of the world, that we should walk in them, okay? This comes from Ephesians 2. And what these good works are is this is actually your destiny. What has the Lord called you to do with your life? He's already created these good works. They are already there. It's your job to figure out what they are and how to pursue them. And so that was our first thing we started talking about. And while we talked on that, we came up with the discussion of, is the Lord looking for quality, or is he looking for quantity? What are we measured on? And we found with the parable of the sower and the seed that the only thing that counted was the seed sown on the good soil that produced fruit. And so what we found is that fruit is actually quality. It's the only thing that lasts for eternity. And we are measured on those things that last for eternity. The good things that we do in life, if they don't have eternal impact, they are counted as worthless. So the first step in doing anything in serving the Lord is it has to be quality to even count. And then from there, everything else that we do, that's quality, we're measured on quantity. How many of those things? That's why it doesn't say in Ephesians that God created a good work for us to walk in, but that he created good works that we should walk in them. So it's multiple, it's quantity. And then the last session, we started to talk about something a little bit different. And we started to talk about, how do you bear more fruit? And we came through a 5-step process. The first one is you need to focus on what it is the Lord's called you to do. And this is where we use the 3 circles, a Venn diagram, and you look at the things that you love to do, and then the things that you are good at doing, and then those things that can make disciples. Because the focus is the Great Commission. Jesus says number 1 priority for us is to make disciples and teach them to become as I am, right? Teach them to do all that I commanded you to do, and their disciple is to become like the teacher. And so the things that you love to do, that you're good at doing, and that can make disciples, that sweet spot is your focus, okay? That is directing you where the good works are. So the way that you identify your good works is you take this simple assessment. What do I love to do? What am I good at doing? And what of those 2 things can I do in some capacity to make disciples? And whatever that is, that's where the Lord's most likely called you. That's where then you pray about it and you seek the Lord and confirm it. I told a short story, a guy who loved mountain climbing, rock climbing, and he was really good at it. And he's a passionate Christian. He was zealous for good works. And how can where was the Lord calling him? So he eventually decided to start a rock climbing school to teach people advanced rock climbing and use it as a ministry to reach them for the gospel. Okay? So that's one way to do it. For me, I love marketing and I love studying God's Word. I'm good at teaching. And so why not use those 3 things? So I have a marketing business and I teach the gospel to my clients, which is what this podcast is all about. And that's building up disciples, okay? So that's the first thing we looked at last time in terms of these 5 steps, the focus, which is what have you been called to do? Then the second thing we looked at is the second step in doing good works is you have to prioritize. Okay? You have to say, if this is a good work, I'm going to make it a priority in my life. I'm not just going to set it on the back burner. I'm going to make it a priority that I can start to focus on consciously and deliberately. And we read a story about a guy named Janor, who is in Australia. And he was in the military. He was just a total reprobate. And then he came to Jesus, and it totally changed his life. And he was so gracious, so thankful for what Jesus did, that he committed to the Lord that he would do something simple every day to serve him. And he didn't have that many skills. So the one thing he said, I can do, I can hand out gospel tracts, and I'll hand them out to 10 people a day. And 40 years later, 10 people a day, 365 days a year, for 40 plus years, hundreds of thousands of gospel tracts, lots and lots of people coming to the Lord, and life change because of that simple commitment. So the key is, what are you prioritizing in life? And prioritizing means that you start to produce good works, right? You start to prioritize it. Then the third thing is we talked about stop doing. Stop doing is all about the parable of the seed and sower. And this is soil number 3. The seed hits the soil, it grows up among thorns, but the thorns choke it out and it produced no fruit. So what type of things are you doing that is choking out your good fruit? They could be good things, but they're not great things. There's an old saying that good is the enemy of great, right? And Steve Jobs made the comment, he said, understanding what not to do is probably as important as understanding what to do, okay? And so the idea is, what are the things, what are the thorns in your life that is crowding out your ability to produce fruit? And this helps you start producing more fruit. I shared a story of a crisis pregnancy center. It was in Dallas and still is, I believe. And they were started with the singular purpose, save babies from abortion, which is a really great work. They're passionate about it. They're good at it. As they started to grow their ministry, they started adding other divisions and other ministries that they could reach out to those same moms and really nurture them along, to the point that when a friend of mine was working with them, he was asking them, their budget at that time was $3.5 million a year. They had 20, 25 employees doing all kinds of great work. And so my friend asked him and said, hold on one moment, make sure this is, asked him and said, how many babies did y'all save last year? And the executive director said, I don't know. He said, well, can you look up the record? So she did. She came back a little sheepishly, and she said, we saved 7 babies last year. What happened is they started doing all kinds of good works that choked out the great work. The number one thing that they were in business to do, their good work that was the destiny, was to save babies. And they weren't saving babies because they were busy doing all these other things, busy work. So my friend suggested that they cancel all the other programs, let those people go, and focus back on the number one priority. The next year, they had 10 times increase in good works. They went from saving 7 babies from abortion to 70. And the next year, they had a 10 times increase as well, and they saved 700 babies. Simply by stop doing the things that distracted them from their number one job. And the hard part of the stop doing is these are usually good things, and they're impacting people's lives to a degree, but they're not making the great eternal impact of those things that the Lord has called you to do. The things you love to do, you're good at doing, and that can really be used to make disciples. The fourth thing that we've talked about after the stop doing is to strategy, to start to apply strategy in what you're doing. And what strategy does is allows you to go from more fruit to much fruit. By this, my Father is glorified, that you bear much fruit, right? That you bear much fruit. And so the question is, once you stop doing the things and you've gotten the clutter out of your life and now you're focused, then how can you apply strategy? What type of strategy can you apply to multiply and increase the fruit so that now you're doing much fruit, okay? One of the things I did just with my teaching is my priority was start teaching radical faith. So I did it in my Sunday school at my church, and I impacted tens of people over the years. Then I started to put it on CDs for my business community. And now I started to impact hundreds of people. And then more recently, we started putting it on podcast. And now we're able to impact thousands of people. It's the same teaching. All it is changing the strategy to exponentially push it out there even more. So what is it in strategy that you can do to impact your fruit from going from more fruit to much fruit? And then the fifth and final thing we talked about was looking at everything you do through what I call the eternal impact lens. Eternal impact lens. And what this is all about is every time you have other opportunities come your way, things that people ask you to participate in, other things that you say, oh, this would be a really good add-on. Sort of like with the Crisis Pregnancy Center. This would be really good because we can minister in this way. Every time you have other things that come your way, opportunities, you always need to look at those through the eternal impact lens of saying, if I do this, what happens to my eternal impact of the focus and the priority that I need to be doing. And what this will do is it will allow you at that time to continue your good works even more. If you, let me get one thing situated, sorry. If you're not careful and you don't look at every new opportunity that comes your way through the eternal impact lens, then you stand a good chance of starting to veer off course, get what we call mission creep, right? It starts to creep out your mission, and now you start to wander and you lose the quantity of what the Lord's called you to do. And you start focusing on good things instead of great things. So that's where we ended up last time. Today, I want to talk about a little bit different thing. So the question then is, as we start doing the stop doing, once we start to prioritize to start our good works, look at the things that we can do to stop doing that's crowding out those good works, and then look at strategies where we can do even more. What this takes is this takes an element of faith, because at this point, as you start to apply all of your resource, all of your mental focus, all of everything else you do, then by definition, other things that you feel you need to do start to have less opportunity for you to do it. One way to say it is, you have a job, and the Lord's called you to build over here, and it's not necessarily where your job is. So do you keep working as many hours in your job or your career, providing for your family and your lifestyle, or do you go over here and do what you know the Lord has called you to do? Because now you have this big choice. Does that make sense? That's where I want to take it today. How do you start to do that? And what's interesting, have y'all ever had one of those times when in your quiet time with the Lord, and the audios you listen to, the things people comment, that you just get this consistent message from wherever you are, that the Lord keeps saying the same message over and over again through different words, different means. You know what I'm talking about? It's like, okay, I get it, Lord, you're telling me this. Well, that happened to me recently, and that's what this session is all about. And I want to walk you through this. So when we're zealous for good works, if we're really going to be zealous for it, there's going to be an abandonment of, I'm going to run with reckless abandon toward the good works. That's what zealous is all about. It's not mediocre, being mediocre for good works. It's being zealous for good works. And if you're zealous, you're going to see it because it drives everything that you do. You're going to be passionate about it. It's all you can think of. And you're going to run with reckless abandon. Think about when you're dating, and you're dating this person that ends up being your spouse. In that dating period, you become zealous for that time with each other. And it's all you can think of. Every moment of your day, you structure your day to be with that person because you're zealous about being with it. Does that make sense? And when you do that, all kinds of other things fall by the wayside. How do you do that here? So the first thing we find is, don't be anxious. So I want you to turn to Luke 12. I want to show you a pattern. And what startled me, this is Luke 12, starting with verse 22. What startled me as the Lord was sharing this is, I never saw this. What I'm about to show you today, I never saw it. Instinctively, kind of back in the back of my brain and understanding, I understood it. But what he made so clear to me was unmistakable. But it ties into everything I've been teaching in some other capacities. So with that, let's read the Don't Be Anxious, Luke 12, 22 through 28. And all of my passages are coming from the NIV, just FYI. Then Jesus said to his disciples, "Therefore I tell you, do not worry about your life, what you will eat, or about your body, what you will wear. For life is more than food, and the body more than clothes. Consider the ravens. They do not sow or reap. They have no storeroom or barn." Watch this. "Yet God feeds them. And how much more valuable are you than birds? Who of you, by worrying, can add a single hour to your life? Since you cannot do this very little thing, why do you worry about the rest? Consider how the wildflowers grow. They do not labor or spin. Yet, I tell you, not even Solomon in all of his splendor was dressed like one of these. If that is how God clothes the grass of the field, which is here today and tomorrow is thrown into the fire, how much more," and watch this, "will he clothe you, you of little faith?" So you go, okay, I've read that a number of times. What's the big deal? Well, Jesus teaches not to worry about your food or clothing or any of your provision. And why? He says, don't worry because you don't think you have enough or that you're afraid that you're going to run out. And why are we not to worry? Why are we not to be anxious? Because God loves us so much, it says that he will provide it for us. That's why we're not to be anxious. Because the Lord will provide all that we need with, and this is the point, with no requirement on our part to toil for it. And he provides it simply because he loves us. What's the implication? The Lord provides it. It's not that the Lord provides it if we work hard enough to earn it. Is that he provides it for us because he loves us. And that's why we're not to be anxious. See, if I have to go out and earn it, I'm going to be anxious if I'm doing enough. Watch this as it relates to being zealous for good works. I want to go out and be zealous. I got this job. I need to come back and really work the job because I got all these bills. I'm anxious for providing my provision. But Jesus is saying, don't be anxious because it's your Father who gives it to you.
It's his good pleasure to give it.
It is his good pleasure to give it to you as well. And so, and the other thing is, not only is it his good pleasure, we are not to toil for it. This is the aha. So before you say, well, you're supposed to work hard. It's good to work hard, right? The Lord never tells us not to work. Well, that's not quite as true. Hold on one moment. I got an audio issue. Let me figure this out. Hold on a moment. Someone just joined in and I got some audio background. If you can mute yourself. Something happened on my screen and I can't control it. Thank you. So what's interesting is Jesus never tells us that we have to toil and work hard for our provision. In fact, it's just the opposite. Jesus never tells us anything but the fact that the Lord will always provide it. That he's going to take care of all of our provision. But the catch is this. We have to be doing the work he's called us to do. In the way that he's called us to do, we have to be zealous for the good works that he's called us to do. And he promises if we're doing what those good works are, he will always provide over here. I had a fun story, interesting thing that happened just a couple of days ago. We had a guest stay with us. And she's looking at the house and she says, so what do you do to earn money? I said, well, I just spend time with the Lord and I teach his word. She starts looking at this house and she said, well, you know, it's going to take some money to pay the mortgage on this thing. And she was kind of tiptoeing around, asking, what do you do? Because this doesn't come free, right? And so I kind of teased with her, but I knew where she was going. But what I started explaining to her is if you're pursuing what the Lord's called you over here, He'll always make the money come in over here, somewhere, on the other side. Yes, I have a job, I have a business. I tend to the business, but I don't focus on it. I focus over here, and the Lord has promised, if you focus over here, doing what I called you to, I'll take care of your business and I'll bring the business in that you need. I said, fair enough. So I don't have to worry about the business because he has promised to take care of it. That's what he's talking about here. If you're doing the good works that he's called you to do, and you're pursuing it with a passion, you can pursue it without any worry about what the Lord's going to do in provision, because he'll always take care of your needs. That's the first thing we get out of this Luke 12 passage. But let me show you the next one. So what we get first out of here, let me just write this down. Don't be anxious. And why is that? Because God will provide. We're going to see this theme come out. God will provide when you're zealous for good works. Let's look at the other one. My wife had a little conundrum over this one. She was asking me the other day, oh, what's the Lord teaching you? And this is the part that came out. Sell your possessions. So, being zealous for good works. Luke 12, verses 32 and 33a. Says, do not be afraid, little flock, for your Father has been pleased to give you the kingdom. There it is again. Give you the kingdom. Sell your possessions and give to the poor. So, three things we can take out of this little passage. The first one is we are a little flock. What that means is that we're the sheep. Excuse me. We're the sheep, and Jesus is our shepherd. And you start to think about how do sheep and shepherds work? Sheep do not toil for their food. They simply go wherever the shepherd leads them and eats it. They don't wander around on their own, looking all over the hillside, looking for something to eat. They simply just follow behind the shepherd, and then the shepherd lets them stop, and then they receive whatever is there. That's it. That's how sheep work. And it is the shepherd's responsibility to provide for the sheep. It's not the sheep's responsibility to provide for themselves. After all, sheep are stupid, right? So they don't have any brains to go out and provide for themselves. So that's the first thing we get out of this. The second thing, it says, your Father has been pleased to give you the kingdom. Now, this is referencing the new kingdom, right? And with the kingdom comes all of the provision that the kingdom already produces. Because sons of a king do not work, right? They always are given the kingdom, and the provision is given to them without their labors. And that's kind of what this is referencing. But even though this is referencing the new kingdom, it says that the Lord is the same yesterday, today, and forever. And so, even though it's the new kingdom, this shows his character, that he still gives us the old kingdom. And with the old kingdom, where we live now, it's all provision. He provides for us. And that's what we get out of this, is that he provides all we need. It's not what we do that provides it. And then the third thing we get out of this is we're commanded to sell your possessions and give to the poor. Doesn't that make you have sort of like a little heart attack? Oh my gosh, sell everything, become destitute, have nothing, trust on the Lord. Well, that's not what he's talking about. Because it was only the rich young ruler that Jesus says, go sell all that you have and give to the poor and come follow me. Because he knew that the rich young ruler's problem was he was holding on to his wealth. Here, Jesus simply says to sell your possessions and give to the poor. So how are we to live if we do that? Well, simply, we're the sheep. The Lord is always going to provide. He's going to give it to us to provide. But it goes a little bit deeper. Because what Jesus is doing in this is he is sharing that this is a general command of how our heart should be. That to always take care of someone in need, and if we don't have ready resource to take care of someone, be willing to sell our possessions to take care of them, and we can do it because the Lord has promised to always take care of us. So if we were to kind of rewrite this passage that says, "Do not be afraid, little flock, for your Father has been pleased to give you the kingdom. Sell your possessions and give to the poor." We can kind of rewrite this by saying, do not be afraid to sell your possessions and give to the poor, because your Father will freely provide all you need as a shepherd does for a sheep. You know, that's basically the context of what he's talking about. And this is what we see in Acts 4. You know, we see the group of believers, they all hold everything in common. And you have believers that are selling some of their property, bringing the resources in to distribute among those that don't have anything. And so that's the context that we see here that Jesus is talking about. So what's our interim conclusion with both of these? Both of these are saying the same thing. Don't be anxious. Why? Because God will provide. Be willing to sell your provisions. Why? Because God will provide. And the other thing that we get out of this is in both cases, it says that the Lord will give it to us. Very simply. He will give it to us without us having to toil. Now let's look at the Lord's Prayer. Another passage. This also is going to come from Luke. Luke 11:3. We're just going to look at one line of the Lord's Prayer. Luke 11:3. And it says, give us, there it is again, give us each day our daily bread. How many times have y'all recited that over the years? Hundreds or thousands, maybe? Have you ever really thought about what this sentence means? See, every time I've quoted this, and I've been quoting this probably since 10 years old, okay? And I give intellectual assent of give us this day our daily bread, but I've never really given it not in a huge degree, the conviction of a heartfelt, faithful conviction to live that way at face value. Does that make sense? We give this intellectual assent. Yes, God, provide everything for me. But then we've always been taught, I have anyway, work like it's all up to you and pray like it's all up to God. And between the two of you, you'll get all your provision. But that's not what this is saying. It says we're to ask the Lord to give us, not to reward us for good labor. The word give in the Greek actually means to give freely of one's own possession. Okay? And so what this is saying, give us this day our daily bread, give us each day, that our daily bread, our provision, already belongs to the Lord. We're not asking him to reward us for working hard in the field and reward us with our provision that we've earned. We're saying, Lord, our provision you already own. Give it to us without the toil that goes along with it. And now you're going, I don't know if I really agree with that. We're supposed to work hard. Proverbs says the lazy man gets nothing and the diligent man gets a lot. I know where you're going. And Proverbs 31, the diligent woman, the diligent wife, and we're supposed to be diligent with all we do. But that's not the message that we see throughout the Bible. That's definitely not the message we see throughout Jesus's teachings. And if you really start to peel back the onion, you start to look at this, you start to see a deeper truth. And that's what the Lord's been showing me, and that's why I'm guiding you through on this. So let's look at a couple of things here. First, give us. We don't ask the Lord to reward us for doing hard, strenuous labor for our own provision. We're simply asking him to give us our provision from that which is his. So if you remember, Peter says that we are a royal priesthood. Do you remember that? I think it's 1st or 2nd Peter. That we are a royal priesthood for God. We see the same message in Hebrews, that we are brothers with Jesus. He is a high priest, we are priests. We see in the Old Testament that the Levites were called as God's own clan, right? Own tribe. And he says that you have no inheritance in the land because I am your inheritance and I provide all for you. That's the same message we're seeing here. See, the 12 tribes of Israel, they were the ones to toil hard in the land, but not the priests. The priests did not toil at all. All of their provision is given to them by the Lord. And if we are sons of God by faith, if we are a royal priesthood, and we are doing the good works that the Lord has laid out for us to do, building his kingdom, our provision is given to us by the Lord. We don't have to strain and toil for it. And that's why Jesus keeps saying, give, give, give. Ask your Father to give. Your Father will give. He will give. Because it's all given to us. It's not earned by our hard labors. We're going to see that a little bit more, but let me go down this a little bit further. So the first thing we find here is giving us means it's not a reward for something we've earned. It's not wages that we've earned. Give us, Lord, provide the wages that I've earned. No, give from that which is yours, my provision. The second thing we see out of this, it says each day. So we're to rely on the Lord to give us our provision each day, every day. And this is referencing, if you remember, Israel in the Old Testament times. They come out of Egypt. They go into the wilderness period as the Lord is training them to be his people, teaching them who he is, his character, and what he does. And part of that, a big part, was this thing called manna. And manna is their provision. And it said that they would harvest the manna in the morning, and some people would keep it till the next day. And what happened when they kept it the next day? Yeah, it would stink and turn rancid, right? They couldn't eat it. What do you think the Lord was doing? He was training them, trust me every day for your provision, for I give it to you. They never had to work for their provision through the entire time of being in the wilderness. The Lord was teaching them that you trust and rely on me, and I give you your provision from my abundance. That's what this is talking about. Give us each day our daily bread. We're to live in such a way that we don't worry about trying to store things up for tomorrow, right? You remember all those proverbs that say, store up and save for the more, save for the later years and build up that barn, right? Build up your nest egg and your resources. I'm not saying that's bad. What I am saying is Jesus doesn't teach it. Jesus teaches to give us each day our daily bread, to be willing to sell our possessions freely at any time, and be anxious for nothing. It says even the ravens do not store up in barns, and yet the Lord feeds them every single day. And that's what Jesus is trying to tell us. If we're going to be zealous for good works and pursue what he's called us to do, to make disciples with abandon, with reckless abandon, we cannot be focused on trying to make our own provision. That's a good work, but it's not a great work. It has no eternal impact. And it also says, I don't trust your word, Lord, that you're going to give to us. I'm going to get to, should you have a job? Where does the job fit in? I'm getting there. But I'm just setting the stage first. So the Lord is teaching, he was teaching Israel in the wilderness rely on him entirely for their provision. And Jesus is teaching us the same thing. Rely on him only for our provision. And that provision is to be given, not earned. Priests do not earn their living. The 12 tribes who were given the land had to earn it, but not the priest. So, but it doesn't stop there. The Lord's Prayer, the message is God will provide, right? Okay? The next thing is we're to seek first his kingdom, right? Seek first his kingdom. Let's turn to Matthew 6:33 on this one. Matthew 6:33 is the end of the same passage we read in Luke earlier about being anxious for nothing. It's just a companion of that same message that's recorded in Matthew. So Matthew 6:33, but seek first his kingdom and his righteousness, and all these things will be, gosh, there it is again, will be given to you as well. Seek first his kingdom and his righteousness, and all these things will be given to you. They're not compensated to you because you work hard. They're not your earnings. They're not your wages due because you actually work for your provision. In fact, if I may be so bold as to say it this way, if you feel you have to toil for your provision, you are in sin. Because everything Jesus teaches is that your Heavenly Father will give to you because you are his son, because you are his priest. And priests, royal priests at that, do not work for their living. They serve the Lord, and the Lord provides. That's the difference. There's still labor, but the focus of the labor is on good works that he's called us to do, and not worried about how do we make provision. I'm still going to talk about a job in just a moment, okay? So we're getting there. But the crux of the matter on this passage, and this is really the key of everything, is to seek first his kingdom. Only if we seek first his kingdom do all of these other things get given to us. So it's an if-then. And in an if-then statement, if we do what the Lord's called us to do, then he promises all the provision. What he's called us to do, by the way, is to do it in his effort, his strength, not ours. To do it by faith in the Spirit, not to do it by flesh and the natural. Anytime we try to do God's work by human labor, it always amounts to very little. You see this a lot in the mission field. You have a missionary that they go out there and they get burned out in 3 to 5 years and they come back home. Why? Because they did it all in the flesh, thinking it was how hard they worked, how many hours they put in, how compassionate they were. And they forgot that it's the Lord's job to do their work for them. All they're to do is to tend the work that they've been called to do. So when you have, a while back we did a teaching on the three bodies in the group of, in the body of Christ. You have the servants, the saints, the sons. The servants are the ones that they don't really believe in the aspect of faith in doing work, okay? They believe in faith for Jesus, for salvation, but everything else is it's all interpreted through man's wisdom. Those is where you get most of the burnout. As you move more into the saint and into the son church, what happens is there's a much more reliance and understanding of faith, that by faith, all things are possible. And so when you have someone that goes into the mission field, that does it through working through faith, through prayer, through allowing the Lord to work through them, not only do they have great fruit that they do and lots of fruit that they do on the mission field, but they don't get burned out because they're always working from a position of rest. They're doing their work of the ministry in rest, not in toil. And that's what this seeking first his kingdom is all about. The only way that you can seek his kingdom first in all you do is that you do it in rest, and you do it in rest by faith in the Spirit. That may be, I'm not sure if that's resonating, but it's a different, you're not doing it by your own labors. Okay? You're out there putting forth you're contributing the labor, the activity, but all of the expectation of what's going to happen is entirely the expectation the Lord's going to do it through you. And therefore you are just the human body through which the Lord's Spirit manifests through you is no longer I who do it, but Christ who lives through me, Galatians 2:20. That's what seeking first his kingdom is about. And when you do that, our provision is given to us. It's not compensated to us as a reward for the work we do. So, interim conclusion so far, all of these passages have a clear message. And that message is our provision is not from our own labor, our own hard work. Our provision is entirely from the Lord and the promise that the Lord will provide. God will provide every single one of these things. The common theme is the Lord will provide. Have no concern about how you're going to pay your bills, about how you're going to handle these things, all these other things in your life. As you're zealous for the good works the Lord's called you to do, he will make all provision abound to you, and he will give it to you from his resource, not from yours. Now let's talk about work. Yes, we must work. We can't just sit home and do nothing, unless you're me, right? No, I'm teasing. But Scripture teaches that it's not our labor that produces what we need. And every time you see faith, man always contributes the little that he has, and the Lord always produces the abundance that you need. You take the widow in Zarephath with Elijah during the time of the drought. She contributed the little that she had, a little jar of oil, a little jar of flour, with only one meal left. And by contributing that, the Lord multiplied it to last until the end of the drought. You take the other widow with Elisha. Her husband died with a bunch of debt. The creditors were about to come take her 2 sons as slaves. She goes to Elisha, and Elisha says, well, what do you have in the house? All I have is a little jar of oil. That's all you need. Go get all the jars in the village. So she started to take that one little jar that she had and poured it in all those jars, and the Lord produced the abundance. We see this even with Jesus feeding the 5,000 with 5 loaves and 2 fish. So we always contribute, we always take the little that we have to contribute, and the Lord produces the abundance that we need. That is the pattern that we see. We even see this with Adam, okay? So Adam is the first Adam. When he came to earth, he was the picture of a son of God. When he left earth, he was the picture of human man. Totally different. As a son of God, his job was to tend the garden, which is he provides labor, right? He's going to tend it, but he's not working it. He's not toiling it. It's already planted. All he does is he tends the garden. The Lord produces the abundant harvest that he needs. But when he fell and God booted him out of the garden, and now he is a human man, not a God man, right? He lost his God-man status. Now in the earth, he has to sweat and toil and labor for all of his provision because God no longer provides it. Why doesn't he provide it? Because he's no longer the Son of God in that aspect. He's no longer in that role of simply tending what the Lord has done. It's now up to him. And so we have our choice. We can either live as Adam and feel like I have to work like it's all up to me to produce all that we need, or I can choose to be a son of God, a royal priesthood, and act by faith in accordance to everything the Lord has been showing us and say, Lord, you promised to give me all my provision. I will tend my job. I will tend my occupation. I will tend my career, whatever it is. But I'm not going to worry about my provision there because I'm going to be zealous for the good works over here, wherever they are. They may be tied into my career. They may be in a different direction. Here's a scary thought. My career doesn't afford for my good works where I've been called. So I now have to choose, do I leave my career, everything I've been trained in the natural to do to earn money, and it's producing an income and helping us survive, and do I abandon that and go pursue what I know the Lord has called me to do? That's scary. Can I actually trust the Lord to take care of all of our needs, to make all abundance be given to me? Or do I act by sight and by fear, and I stay where it's comfortable financially because I got a job and I got bills? That's the step of faith. Do you see what I'm talking about? Or do you believe God's word at face value, or do you apply man's wisdom into it and say, well, that can't be true? That's too risky. I've got a wife and kids, or sometimes I got a husband and kids, right? Depending on who's a breadwinner. We got a mortgage, we got car payments, we have school education. How can I put all of that at risk and do what the Lord's called me to do? You can do it because the Lord has promised that if you seek first His kingdom and His righteousness, all these things will be given to you. Yeah.
I was just watching you telling me when you were saying that. He said the true revelation of God's relationship to His kingdom is actually the treasure in the field.
Yes.
And you'll sell everything to buy the field because He's shown you the treasure.
That's it.
In the field.
Right. That's the whole idea.
Yeah.
The treasure is the Lord.
Right.
And where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. And where's your heart? Your treasure of your money from your job and your security, or the Lord and His promise of all abundance greater than your job will ever provide?
You'll sell everything you have to buy the field.
Yes.
Treasure.
Now keep in mind, these are heavenly truths, right? These are not earthly truths. The difference between a heavenly truth and an earthly truth is a heavenly truth requires faith to manifest it into your earthly reality. And if you don't have faith, it won't work.
That's why when He said, don't take your purse, don't take any shoes, don't take an extra coat. He's telling you to go out
and trust the Lord.
And take nothing. Just ask when you go into the town, who is a worthy man?
Mm-hmm. And
He said that man will provide for you.
He will. And you remember when they came back, did he say, he said, did you lack for anything? No. Right? And so He's teaching them and training them the same thing God did with Israel in the wilderness. Every day the Lord provides. And the provision is always through something in the natural that looks like it was going to happen anyway. It's always a cause and effect. Someone gives us a check here, I make another sale over here, and we say, well, God's not really providing. Oh, that's just normal stuff. That's how God provides, right? Very rarely does He just put manna there and you open up the door and there's a pile of gold. That's not normal. Well, let's keep going before I ran out of time too much. So you have to act by faith. How do you know if you're acting by faith when you do this? The simple answer, faith, the evidence of faith is the mountain moving. The evidence of faith when you do this is the Lord provides, right? That's when you know you're acting by faith because the Lord provides. But it's a little bit more than that. When you prioritize the good works that the Lord has called you to do. When you make it your priority, you clear out all of the thorns in your life that's choking it out from being more fruit, and you start to really apply the strategy of what can I do to create much fruit. It's usually the strategy of creating much fruit that you have to give up your security. And if your heart is, Lord, you call me to produce much fruit, I will do that with reckless abandon. In the natural, it's reckless abandon because you're giving up whatever is your security over here. Doesn't mean that you quit your job. It just means that you change how you do it so that your time and focus is over here. It might mean that you quit your job so you can do what the Lord's called you to do with reckless abandon. And when you do that, you know you're seeking His kingdom first because you're giving it all, you're willing to give it all away and put yourself only at the mercy of the Lord to do what His word said He would do. In other words, you're testing His word so that He can prove it true. That is stepping out by faith. How do you know if you're not stepping out by faith? Because you put your kingdom and your provision first and put His second. Anytime you put Him second, it doesn't work. Once you put your kingdom and your provision first, then it's all about toil and sweat. You're going to have to work as hard as you can and work like it's all up to you, because at that point it is, right? It's only up to the Lord when you actually do what the Lord's called you to do. But we got one final passage. Wealth without toil. How many of y'all like the sound of that? Wealth without toil. Would you like wealth without toil? Does God ever promise wealth without toil? Everyone's quiet. Turn to Proverbs 10:22. Proverbs 10:22. As I mentioned, when I put all this together, it was a period of about probably 7 to 10 days, maybe 2 weeks. All these things, Lord just kept putting these things in my lap and opening and bringing these passages to me and started to reveal this common thread. Proverbs 10:22. I say that because I didn't go looking in the Bible to find verses to support a predetermined conclusion. The blessing of the Lord brings wealth without painful toil for it. Are you serious? The Lord says He's going to bring wealth without you toiling for it. Yes. In fact, can I tell you a little secret? Watch this. We're going to go. That's fancy, isn't it? We're going to go to the Old Testament for just a real quick lesson. You have the 12 tribes of Israel. Joseph is turned into two tribes. So now you have actually 13 tribes because Joseph has Manasseh and Ephraim, and Abraham claims them as his own children. Then you go into the wilderness, and God claims one of those tribes as his own. He claims Levi. This is now the tribe of the Lord, and that leaves 12 tribes of Israel. Does this make sense so far? Okay. God said to Levi, you have no provision in the land because I am your inheritance. So all of the 12 tribes were given land, and they had to go out and toil the land, raise their herds, and do all that stuff. And they brought a tithe, the 10% of the very best, to the Lord as a sacrifice. You remember that? And who got to keep the sacrifice? The Levites kept the 10%. But now the Levites are not priests. They're worker bees. Only a portion of Levites are the priests. Only those who come through the tribe, the family of Aaron. So picture this now. I'm just going to do a little math to show you the great riches and wealth that the Lord has in store for those who operate as a priest. All right. So the 12 tribes bring the 10%, which means 12 people give to one person, which means that one person now has 120% more than the average of each of the 12. Does this make sense? Okay. Just simple math. But out of all the Levites, there's probably, and I'm now just guessing, probably one priest for every, let's call it 200 Levites. I mean, when you have a whole tribe and you just have one family group of Aaron to be the priest. So what happens then, now you have these 200 Levites giving 10% of the best that they received to the priest. Now that priest has 20 times more individually than each Levite did. And each Levite had 120% more than each of the tribes. So what you see is the Lord's inheritance is great wealth without toiling, because the priest did the most important work. So the tribes, they toiled. The Levites, they did ministry of the Lord. And the ministry of the Lord is they received the sacrifices. They did a lot of the work in preparing the sacrifices. But the priests, they did ministry to the Lord. And that is a much higher calling. And as a priest, they received the greatest abundance. And they did not toil for it. As a son of God, sons of God, right? That's what we are, sons of God through faith, children of God, a royal priesthood, wealth without toil. Proverbs 10:22, the blessing of the Lord brings wealth without painful toil for it. This is the same pattern that we see through all of these. God will provide. It's not our labors that are providing it. Sure, we contribute effort in whatever career or thing that we do to create money, but it's only contributing the effort. It's the Lord that multiplies it to the abundance that we need and that He chooses for us to have. This is why we're not to be anxious, because God will provide. We're to be willing to sell our possessions and give to the poor, because God will provide. We're supposed to pray the Lord's Prayer. God provide. Seek first His kingdom, and all of these things will be given to you. Wealth without toil. That the blessing of the Lord brings wealth without painful toil. All of this, God provides because God gives. We don't live off of our labors. We live off the inheritance of the Lord as a royal priest, as a son of God through faith. God will always provide abundantly all that we need as we walk as a son of God through faith. That's the key, through faith. What is faith? God's called me for good works. That's my calling in my line of work in building up the disciples, to make disciples. And I will pursue that zealously with reckless abandon and leave all my provision entirely to the Lord. And it's stepping out, not worrying about the future, not worrying about, well, I don't have enough money, I need to save up. Let me wait till I get a year's supply of savings before I go out on my own, or whatever it may be. It's saying, Lord, you said that you will provide every day. Give me this day our daily provision from your inheritance, not from my labors. And so I'm going to step out by faith. If you don't do it by faith, none of this happens. Because we're not sons of God yet, except by faith. Only at the resurrection do we become truly sons of God, right? That's when we receive the new kingdom. But we are sons of God now through faith if you step out and do it by faith. So what's the conclusion? First question is, what are the good works that he has prepared beforehand that you should be walking in? What do you love to do, you're good at doing, and that can make disciples? That should be your focus. And because of all of these promises, you can afford to seek first his kingdom and his righteousness and what he's called you to do, and not worry about your provision. And all of that provision will be given to you. You can run with reckless abandon and never have to look back and never have to worry about, how are you going to pay bills? See, this is what Jesus did. This is what Jesus is telling us to do. All these passages. If you really get down to it and think about it, all of this, being zealous for good works, has some characteristics. It's the dying to yourself. All of your things that you think you need, the things you want, the things that are good, is being willing to die to yourself and pursue only the Lord for the good works that he's called you to do. Pursuing a deeper relationship with him, seeking his kingdom first, and the Lord tells you, if you do, tremendous blessings await you because he's going to take care of you. And when the Lord takes care of you, watch this. Back to the priest. When the Lord takes care of you, he doesn't do it slouchily. Those priests, on average, had 20 times more than the Levites, which is about 25 times more than the average person. And they didn't toil in the field all day. That was their inheritance from the Lord, because what they were doing is they were serving the Lord, doing what he called them to do. So let me give this in one final phraseology. Picture. Assume for a moment that your father was a multi-billionaire. Sorry, kids, I'm not. But assume that your father was a multi-billionaire, and he said, if you will simply pursue the Lord with everything you have and follow him in all his calling in your life, I guarantee to take care of all of your financial needs, your housing, your food, your transportation, your kids, their college education, everything, all of your vacations, everything. You have no financial worry in your life. Just run with abandon and pursue the good works the Lord has already prepared beforehand for you to do. If your father said that, how would your life be different than it is right now? Would you pursue the Lord with reckless abandon, knowing you don't have to worry about anything in your life financially? Knowing that you don't have to worry about how are you going to earn the money? Knowing that you don't have to work hard in any other direction other than the direction he's called you to do, to produce much fruit. By this my Father is glorified, that you bear much fruit. And so that you will bear much fruit, my Father will give you all that you need so you can focus entirely on seeking his kingdom and his righteousness first. Are you willing to take his promises at face value and do it? Are you willing to step out by faith? Believe the Lord. Abraham believed God, and it was reckoned to him as righteousness. Are you willing to believe the Lord with childlike faith and say, I'll do it? as opposed to man's wisdom that says, that's preposterous. You got to work hard. You got to work, because you can't expect God to just give it to you. And yet everything in Scripture says God gives to his children. So that is being zealous for good work. God will provide if you do it.
I was just thinking how personal it is. Like zealous for your good works, the good works he designed for you, not what he designed for somebody else.
That's right. It's very personal.
It's very personal.
And that's why you have to search it out.
Yeah.
You have to keep asking yourself, what do I love to do? What am I good at doing? And what are those things that I love to do that I'm good at doing? What of those can I do in a way that makes disciples? And making disciples, as we talked on our first session, sometimes it's leading people to Christ. Sometimes it's discipling young believers, the next step. Other times it's taking them deeper. Other times it's doing something else. But the whole purpose of disciple making is, and teach them to do all I have commanded you to do. Help them understand what Jesus said and to grow into being like Jesus modeled. That whole process is disciple making. And like the assembly line workers we talked about on the auto manufacturing place, every worker has his job. And if everyone does their job, the car rolls off the other end as a well-done job. So what part are you to play in that role of disciple making? And do it with abandon. Any other comments or questions? Is this thought-provoking? Yeah. Scary, isn't it?
What about if your job fits in that sweet spot? I mean, what about if you really feel like God wants you to, for example, be a doctor?
Yeah.
And you can do your good works, but you still can earn money.
Absolutely.
I mean, what's wrong with that?
Nothing's wrong. I'm saying that your primary goal is, what's the good work? What do you love to do? So that doctor loves serving in medicine. What is he good to do? He's great in medicine. So how can he use both of those to make disciples? Like your dad. Every single patient that your dad saw, he'd bring him into the office and share the gospel and talk with them about spiritual things. A friend of mine, Bill Slappy, he was great in sales, and he loves electronics and building things, and he wanted to make disciples. So he said, I'm going to start a telephone business, selling telephone hardware to businesses. And I'm going to use that to get into every single business within my community and share the gospel with the business owner and all of his key people as part of my sales process. Real estate agent. If you love real estate and you're good at it, then how do you use real estate to make disciples? Well, how about minister to every single person that you engage with? Every potential client, ask them at the very least, hey, is there anything I can pray for you on? At the very most, you can be like my friend Bill. Hey, I'm a Christian. Can I ask you a few spiritual questions? And you make that part of your process. If you turn them off, that's okay. Why? Because you're not relying on your real estate business to provide your needs. You're in your real estate business to do good works, and you're relying on the Lord to provide your needs. And when you can separate what you have to do to earn money and focus on what the Lord has called you to do, then now you're totally free to do whatever works to build good works. So sometimes having the job works perfect because that's where the Lord's already called you. Now the question is simply prioritize doing good works there and strategizing it. So this isn't quitting your job if that's where the Lord's called you, but that's where you take those 3 circles and see, does it fit? Well, I hope you enjoyed that lesson. And if you're like most people, it's probably a little deep for you because I teach at a very deep level. But you know what? God's Word is deep and powerful. And the more you really understand it, the more you can walk in faith and live in a way that very few people actually do. So I'd like to encourage you to go back and listen to this again or watch it again, because it's like lasagna. When you make lasagna and you eat it the first day, the flavors are fine. But if you let it sit for a day, all the flavors start to meld together, and then they just really burst in flavor, and it tastes fantastic. And that's what actually happens with this type of teaching. When you go back through a second time, you already kind of know what to be expecting because you've already seen it the first time. You go back through, and now it starts to make a lot more sense. And the most important part are the little nuances, the little things I teach that you may have missed the first time, that are the connecting dots to really understand this. They start to come alive. So please go back through. You'll learn a lot more, I promise you. Also, I'd like to extend an invitation, as long as, I'm not sure when you're watching this, but currently I open up my Bible study teaching to Zoom participants, okay? And if you'd like to come and join on a live session, be able to ask me questions or just actually watch it live, then you can find that channel and find the times at my Radical Faith website called getradicalfaith.com. That's where I take all my Radical Faith teaching and just put it in one website, getradicalfaith.com. And up at the top, you'll see a link that says Bible Study. If you click that link, if I'm still opening this up to the public, then you'll find the schedule and you'll find the Zoom link, and I would love to have you join us. Thanks again for watching. Again, be sure to go back and watch it a second time. It's going to make a lot more sense. Have a very blessed day and be very, very blessed.